Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by guest Erin Austin to talk about the legal and ethical issues of AI. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. So could you tell folks who maybe haven't come across your name before a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Erin Austin. I'm founder of Think Beyond IP. That is a law firm that focuses on helping experts turn their expertise into intellectual property assets so they can decouple their income from their time.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so I talk a lot about copyright issues as well as AI, as a matter of fact, and contracts that affect both.
You sent out an email, I think it was a couple days ago. Was it email or LinkedIn? I think it was an email.
It was both, honestly. So
Okay. Spotted. And it was about the difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement, I think. Is that right?
yeah, it was in response to a LinkedIn post where someone, I don't know how it was. Oh, I know somebody actually copied me into the discussion where someone was asking, "Do you think using AI and not crediting the AI platform or that it was written by AI is that plagiarism?" And there were a number of comments about it, and I jumped in to say that I did not think that it is plagiarism, and that is because I look at plagiarism from an ethical point of view, and so that was the jumping off point for the newsletter and that I wrote about that issue.
That's so cool. Okay, so how would you define those terms? I mean, is that something that we can define on our own? I guess ethically speaking, that would be the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, so plagiarism. So that is the ethical breach of stealing somebody else's ideas. And so you can have the legal issues with copyright infringement. Well, let's just talk about the ethical issues of stealing someone's ideas. So we're all familiar with, from our school days that we are supposed to quote, cite our sources, and that we took something from the encyclopedia, which at the time that there were still encyclopedias when I was writing school papers, and we didn't quote them, then or cite them, then we were plagiarizing. And so we are ethically obligated to give credit to where an idea comes from. And so that can have implications, obviously, in the school context. If you plagiarize and don't give credit, you can, get a failing grade or even be kicked out of school. In a professional context, if we are taking somebody else's ideas as our own and not giving proper credit for it, then we can be accused of plagiarism there. But ultimately, who does that ethical obligation run to? And so the question was, is it plagiarism not to credit AI? And in my opinion, is that we do not have ethical obligations to AI. Like, it is not the creator of any ideas. It can take a bunch of data points, billions of data points, and do its magic that it does and have an output. But is that AI's idea? And I would say that it is not. And there's two sides of the coin to plagiarism. One, making sure the originator of the idea is credited. And, I don't think that AI needs that. And as the plagiarist, to make sure that the plagiarist isn't getting credit for the big idea that is not his own. And when we look at the output as of today, the type of output that we're getting from AI is that kind of reputation making output. And so if, again, we're just taking something that gets spit out of AI, a Gen AI platform, and we put our name on it. are we getting something that would be considered thought leadership? Are we getting something that people would go, oh, wow, that's really,
Yeah.
and my experience is that we aren't. And so, from both sides of the coin, I feel like we fail the plagiarism analysis.
Okay, so if I can, to make sure I'm understanding that, I want to summarize it back to
Yep.
you. If plagiarism is stealing someone else's ideas, you'd say, well, it's not someone's idea. AI is a machine. It's like stealing the answer from a calculator. It's like,
Perfect.
and the other thing is the ideas just aren't that good. Well, if they're not ideas, the output's just not that good. So it's not really gaining the air quotes author, the person who used the AI to generate the output. It's not really getting them anything.
Yeah. I mean, what are you gaining reputation wise when you are using AI generated content as your own? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the upside in building your reputation? And I mean, there could be some. I mean, I imagine there's some people who have figured out prompting in such a way that they can really get some quality output. But for the most part, what we see, we recognize it when we see it.
Mm-hmm.
We recognize it when we see it on LinkedIn. We recognize it when we see it in newsletters. We recognize it when we see it on websites. It's right now. It is not something that is reputation enhancing. And so
Right.
I feel that there's very little ethical breach. I mean, uh, you know, there is a certain level of dishonesty, I think, that if you are using it for something that is you're truly presenting it as being something unique, and it's not yours, I think it's dangerous. But I think that from an ethical perspective, that the plagiarism label shouldn't apply to that because it is AI generated.
It does make sense. And actually, here's something I want to call out. That when I first saw that post, I thought that the original poster, who if I can find that, I'll link to in the show notes, but the the original poster, I assumed what they meant was that the AI was, or the person using the AI was plagiarizing the people that the AI was trained on. But that's a different thing, and that isn't what they were actually. That was my first impression, but when I really read it carefully, they were literally talking about crediting like ChatGPT
Right.
as the author of this text. And if you didn't do that, then you were plagiarizing ChatGPT almost like an individual.
Right.
But I agree with. I think there's a lot of other stuff that we can talk about here, but I agree that crediting, like feeling the need ethically to say, I could credit ChatGPT with this feels really weird to me because it's not an individual. But there's this other gray area that's right next to this, which is things like Grammarly that is correcting your things
Mm-hmm.
like punctuation, but it's also making suggestions about how to make a point more clearly. Or just a human editor. A human editor can have a massive influence on, let's say, a book,
Yeah.
but they're not credited as the co-author. It's totally different.
Yeah, well, there are shades of gray here where we're getting into copyright issues. Certainly, when we're talking about a human editor. So,
Mm-hmm.
from a copyright perspective, if we want to have copyright protection in something that is AI generated, um, you your audience probably knows that AI generated content is not eligible for copyright protection because US copyright law requires that the original content be created by a human, and
Mm-hmm.
AI is not considered human. Therefore, AI generated content is not eligible for copyright protection.
Mm-hmm.
But there is kind of this grading of how much AI input can be involved and still get protection. And so if it's 100% AI generated, none. If AI is your co author, then it does not defeat the ability to get copyright protection in the other parts of it. So say have a book and you use AI to create some scenarios for you. You want to so you can have some examples in the book and you use AI to do that. So you can have your copyright protection apply to all the text that you wrote, but then you would carve out those parts that were AI generated, and you would disclose, in your copyright registration application that all of the scenarios are AI generated, and I don't claim copyright protection for those. Then there's AI as a tool. So if we talk about Grammarly or we talk about Hemingway, I think Hemingway is still a thing.
Yep, that's
or even like Photoshop. Like if we're using it as a tool to refine our human creativity, then we can still claim copyright protection for that, the entire work. Obviously, how much is too much? I mean, like there's no formula for that. But that's generally the U.S. Copyright Office's advice when we are registering our copyrights and what we need to declare as being original human created versus AI created.
How much parallel or precedent is there from things like editors or will be another thing? Trying to think of, or let's say you see a lot of sort of business books in the beginning of each chapter, there's like a pithy quote from Steve Jobs or Sun Tzu or something like that. Are you saying that in a case like that, those little pieces would be carved out of the copyright of the overall book?
Oh, that's a good question. Generally, you don't carve out every little quote that is in there. So it would be kind of real chunks of something. So overall, a work, let's just take a book that, quotes people. I have never seen someone carve out, the, people that are quoted within the book or quotes that we pull out. Now, would you be able to get protection with respect to it if somebody else took the quote that you used and used it for something else? Obviously, you would not have copyright protection or remedies against that use. Wherever you got the quote from may or may not have remedies, but you wouldn't. But so it's not, copyright registration is not intended to, that finely parse everything that's in a work. Originally, these issues with how much you can use from technology and whether or not it can still get registration, again, is, how much did it assist the human creativity? And I was looking at it was an early issue regarding the use of technology when creating copyrighted works, and it involved photography. And this was actually, involved a photograph of Oscar Wilde, who happens to be a favorite of mine. And so this would have been, kind of 1910 or so, early photography. And they had taken a photograph of Oscar Wilde, and a lithographer just took the photograph and was selling copies of it. And the photographer claimed, copyright protection in the photograph. And the lithographer said, no, this is just mechanical. The only person who has any rights in this is Oscar Wilde. The photographer doesn't have any rights in this. They just set up a thing. And that's the earliest that I have looked at where the U.S. copyright law applies to using technology to create something that is eligible for copyright protection. And so that kind of flows down to where we are today. But yeah.
So where did that go? Like, was the lithographer found to be?
Yes. So photographers own the copyright interest in their compositions. So the idea is that, the way you pose someone, the lighting, the exposure, those things are all creative. And that's the creative work of the photographer. And the photographer does have copyright ownership of the photograph.
Got it.
If there's a person in it, that's a separate issue. The whether or not you have consent to use the image of the human in there.
Hmm.
But the photograph, the composition itself, is eligible for copyright protection.
Wild. No pun intended. So I keep on wanting to find parallels to pre-AI to. I should reveal my hidden biases. I'm a pretty big fan of generative AI at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and I see a lot of fear mongering from people who are afraid of getting disrupted or whatever the case may be. But
Yeah.
it really feels like major progress to me. I really think it's I could end up regretting these words, but I feel like on balance it's going to be a good thing. I don't think Terminator is going to come and kill us all. So I'm looking for parallels where where stuff like this is already fine. That were just pre AI.
Mm-hmm.
So, dear listener, take all this with a grain of salt because I've got a horse in the race. But what's the copyright situation with someone who you hire someone to ghostwrite a book for you?
Yeah. So with ghostwriting, again, U.S. copyright law, the default without anything in writing is that the human being who created the work is the copyright owner. And so, in the instance of your ghostwriter, if there's no written agreement between you and your ghostwriter owns what he creates, and you have a license to use it. But so if we want to change the default, it has to be in writing and it has to be signed. It can't be by email. It can't be oral. You can give a license orally, but you can't change ownership of copyrights without something in writing and signed. And so, if you want to go back to pre-AI concerns about using lots of information and how the rights flow, OpenAI and probably some of the other early Gen AI platforms relied on an old case regarding, is it Google Books, where they went through and basically copied, libraries and libraries of books so that they could be searchable via Google. And so it was originally was thought to be an copyright infringement because you are copying somebody else's work without their permission. But it was held to be fair use. And I hate even bringing up fair use because it's such a loaded topic. But basically, the courts determined that, scanning all of this information into Google's database so that it is searchable is transformative, and that Google isn't actually selling you the book. It's just helping you find the book. And then you can go off and, get the book from wherever legal sources you get it from. And so OpenAI and its colleagues, kind of use that as the reason why they could basically scrape the internet of all of its data in order to create its training data sets. That is to be determined. That is in courts right now. And so, but I will say that, going forward, they aren't doing that. They're, getting licenses from people who have massive amounts of data, like newsletter archives, newspaper archives,
Reddit.
yeah, film companies, people with radio archives, that kind of stuff, and getting
Yeah.
licenses. But yeah,
Yeah. There's like a new lawsuit every day. So, that's not what we're talking about. So that fight between the training data people, the people whose data was used for training that's definitely a different thing, right?
yeah, there's two sides to, AI. There's the input, which is the scraping the internet or getting a license from, a newspaper. And there's the output. And so the output is we have the issues of copyright infringement, because the input, we don't know where it came from because, how can you know where a billion data points came from? But we do know that it can have outputs, with the right prompting that is essentially a copyright infringement. And so we have risk when we are using the output without knowing what the source is, and not kind of adding our own layer of creativity to it to make sure that, if in fact this is something straight from somebody's archives, that we aren't committing copyright infringement.
And that piece, though, is totally independent of how it was generated, right? Like, in other words, if I typed in an elaborate prompt and it outputs the exact text of Permission Marketing by Seth Godin, and I publish that as a book with my own name, it doesn't matter that an AI did it, right? It's the real problem is that it's the same thing.
That is right. It is, if you publish it, you have committed copyright infringement. And by the way, even if you credit Seth Godin, it's still copyright infringement, because the plagiarism, you haven't plagiarized because you've given him credit, but you have used his protected work without his permission. So when I am the owner of a copyright, I have the exclusive right to distribute it, publish it, make copies of it, make derivatives of it, grant other people rights to do those things. And so if I take something that was spit out of ChatGPT and it happens to be directly from somebody else's work, I know that ChatGPT doesn't have the rights to use it, and they don't pretend to. If you look at their terms of use, they don't claim to grant you any rights in the output. And then I use it. I have committed the copyright infringement because I do not have permission to use his work. Without getting into fair use, because there's always that issue. But but if we were to take that and put it in our course, and we're selling our course with somebody else's work in there, copyright infringement. And it's not a matter of intent. It is did you copy somebody else's work and did you have permission? Period. And if you didn't and you copied, then that is infringement.
So let me jump back a little bit to the ghostwriter thing, where you said that, if you had something, if they had entered into a contract, so like the ghostwriter and the person who wants to pretend to be the author of a work, ChatGPT, an AI can't enter into a contract, but would you, like, who? There's no one to enter in a contract with. Like wouldn't even make sense to me to have a contract with OpenAI for it. It doesn't even make sense.
Right. So that's where we get to who is it copyrightable? Is it eligible for copyright protection? So is AI the co-author? And so in that case, I don't have to give the credit or enter an agreement with it, but I just need to not pretend to have a copyrightable interest in the part that AI generated. So, I don't think you have an ethical obligation to disclose that some part of it was generated by AI. But from a legal perspective, you will not have copyright protection from the parts that were AI generated.
Mm. Okay, so I want to jump back to another thing that you mentioned early on. We're probably, I don't know if we're around the same age, but I definitely grew up with the Encyclopedia Britannica as my main source. That was my internet back then. And I don't recall them referencing anyone in those articles.
You're right. I don't think they did. I mean, I believe they did original research, but I'd have to look to see if they did. But I believe now. I am talking, by the way, about the paper copies of it, the hardback copies of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe they had researchers who compiled those. But I that definitely predates my interest in this topic, but I can look at that. I can look at that to see how they did that.
Yeah, it was not crawling with footnotes.
No.
So.
And by the way, let me just, because not everything we write is eligible for copyright protection. So facts, like world history is not, eligible for protection. Now, the way we express it, the way we write about it is, but all of the facts of history are not protectable. So trying to think back to how much of it was creative and how much of it was just information would also depend on whether or not there were copyright issues there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, my stuff gets ripped off all the time.
Mm,
And it's sometimes more blatant than others.
right.
And of course, I've read a million books about business subjects. I write about business subjects. And but at a certain point, like here's a specific example. I remember probably 25 years ago, maybe more, I read The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber.
Mm-hmm.
And about 15 years later, one of my cousins was about to start a new business, and I recommended that she read it. I was like, I remember this book was great. It really helped me at the time. And she was in the same kind of phase that I was in when I had read it. So I recommended it to her. But before I decided to recommend it, I wanted to reread it to see if it held up because it had been so long. And when I reread it, I was like, oh my God, there are so many ideas that I have that came directly from this book and I didn't even remember.
Mm-hmm.
Not verbatim, but like, oh wow, I strongly believe this thing. It seems obvious to me now, but I didn't remember that I learned it from that book. And I'm not talking about plagiarizing or anything like
Right.
that, but at a certain point, you like learn stuff from other people
Absolutely.
and it gets processed, and then it's gonna almost like an AI. I feel like there's a similar argument here where I've read at least 1,000 books, and the ones that were good had an impact on me, and then that sort of like jumble of 1,000, or maybe 10,000 ideas comes out in a Jonathan Stark version, and I think I don't know, it would be not just problematic, but impossible for me to even trace all that back. So, yeah, at what point does the idea become, go through the food processor enough for it to be a new idea? Because writing about sales and marketing and things like that, there's no new ideas.
Right. Absolutely. Well, first of all, ideas are not protectable. And so, you can protect them if you keep them confidential using a confidentiality agreement. But anything we're reading, those ideas are free for us to use. What we protect with copyright law is the expression of the idea. And so, the more I don't want to say generic an idea is, the less protectable the expression will even be. So let's say if we're talking about, roses by any other name, like that is a very unique way of expressing something. And so we can talk about the idea that, no matter what we call something, the name doesn't matter. But if we say it in such a way that it, evokes a very creative way of talking about that, then that is different than taking an idea like, all leaders are good listeners, and so that idea, we can all use it. If you read a book about someone talking about great, leaders being good listeners, and they wrote about it in kind of plain business English, and you write about it and plain, it's going to be, it's unlikely, it becomes less likely that you will have copied their expression in a way that is so similar without being generic, that would give rise to a copyright infringement. So it really kind of depends on the nature of the underlying work, like how creative is the underlying work. So
Mm.
stealing the idea of a boy wizard with a, lightning bolt and living under the stairs, and you can change all the names and places, and the idea, like, okay, you've stolen the idea there. But if
But
I
you're saying but that's maybe plagiarism, but not copyright infringement.
Well, there's an interesting, under copyright law, you can have a character copyright, and I probably should have brought that up. I was thinking I'll get myself in trouble here, but you can. So there, you can have like a character that's so well known that you can have protected interest in a character, but that's pretty rare. Those are the
Okay.
Harry Potters of the world kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Is the fact that a lot of, I guess, probably the vast majority of copy, I get the copyright is the right to copy, not copywriting. So how much of an effect does the digital nature of all of this stuff come into play? Like with I guess either plagiarism or copyright. Either way,
Yeah.
I guess copyright's the more important one. But like today, somebody sent me a picture of one of my comics that someone just completely ripped off and put their name on,
Mm-hmm.
and a little copyright symbol with their name, and backdated it to before I was even doing comics.
Wow.
But I know I didn't rip his off.
Right.
So it seems like kind of a big coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big difference is the ease, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to do it. We always had access to anything that anyone published. If it's published and therefore made public, we have access to it and we can steal it. But there's a lot we need to do if it's, we took it out of the Sunday paper and we've got to retrace it and do all these things versus if we can download it, and I assume there's some sort of AI, something that can change it for them. And it is the ease, but the fact of copyright infringement hasn't changed based on the technology. That if they are taking your work and they're creating a derivative of your work using technology or using their hand, that is an infringement of your rights as the copyright owner of that work.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think they probably just do more damage to themselves than to me. But the only thing that makes me nervous about it, and I don't want to pull us into an off-topic thing, but I suppose it's closely related, is I've heard that you can kind of be copyrighted out of your own stuff, where I don't know if like say this person who's is stealing my content, or maybe it's just the AI company hoovering it up. If the original creator didn't do anything to kind of say, yeah, this is mine. I created this thing on this date, and then
Mm-hmm.
someone quickly rips it off. And you didn't do that, and then someone quickly rips it off and then does that. Then you can't like for example, sell your own book anymore because or your course, like somebody takes a course and generates a version of it with like their face in the videos instead of mine,
Mm-hmm.
and their voice instead of mine. And I didn't do anything with I don't even know who I would go to with the copyright department, the copyright authorities,
Exactly.
like, and then the other person sues me because they say that they're the ones that have the copyright. I mean, normally I share things with like MIT, very permissive license, so that they do spread. I want people to share them, and I don't, it's nice when you get credited, but I don't care that much. There's stuff I'm publishing for free anyway, and I want the ideas to spread. That's more important to me,
Right.
and I'll make my money in other places. But those other places where I make my money, someone in theory, I suppose, could beat me to the punch and block me from selling my own stuff, or is that just totally?
Yeah. Well, I do encourage copyright registration of your money makers. I mean, I know you actually write every single day and publish every single day, and you are not going to register everything that you write. But when you do
Right.
have those money makers, I do encourage you to register in the Copyright Office because that provides prima facie evidence of your ownership of that work. And so anything that was created after that, regardless of when they date it, would you would have the ability to enforce your exclusive rights against those infringers. Um, Copyright protection does attach automatically the moment you create it, but if you don't register it in the U.S. Copyright Office, then you do have some exposure for somebody else creating something that they claim is their original and registering it ahead of you.
Mm.
That could happen. But again, like, no, you're not gonna do that with everything. And
Right.
but with our money makers, then I would do that.
Back when I was in music school in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, all of us songwriters used to make cassette tapes of our songs and mail them to ourselves.
They called it the poor man's copyright. I heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that actually brings up music, which is another one that I don't know if we've been talking mostly about words and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about photography. The music one, I feel like, is another one where there's a lot of what seems like it could be precedent for remixing things, and
Yeah.
uh, like DJs and sampling and all of that stuff.
Well, that brings up kind of a parallel. When we look at how to fix AI, when there's billions of data points out there, how are you going to compensate all the people who may have, rights in the data sets? And some of the solutions they're looking for is like a compulsory license, which is what we have, in music, so that if I want to, use one of your songs and it's with a music publishing house, and I can do that. I don't need to come and get your permission to re-record it or perform it.
Well, is that like a cover band can play Stairway to Heaven in a bar, or do you mean, or you don't? Oh, actually, you could record a cover, and I think the copyright is for the recording, not the song.
Well, there's two. We are getting a little bit dangerous, but we have a couple of levels of copyright. So you have the song. So that is the lyrics and the notes, right? And so whoever wrote those, that is protected under U.S. copyright law. Separately, we go into the studio and we record it. And the recording is a separate work that has separate copyright protection and may even have a separate owner, like such as a recording studio maybe owns it. But what permissions you may need to exploit that recording will depend on, who wrote the music, who wrote the lyrics and the music,
right,
and who performed it.
So here's like, I wonder if this would, if anyone's considering, I'm sure someone is, but the, ASCAP and BMI I assume they still exist. I have not really paid attention.
I believe they do.
But if you go into dear listener, if you go into a bar or something and, the radio is on or jukebox is playing stuff, that establishment is supposed to be paying some amount of money to this trade association that then distributes the money in all these crazy ways that Erin just described. Right. There's like songwriters and there's publishers and there's music labels and there's recording studios and there's a million things. And they somehow try and divide that money up across all those people. I know it certainly has been a big problem over the years. But that feels kind of similar to is that kind of what's happening on the other side, on the open AI fighting with the original creators side of things, where it's just going to turn into like, well, we'll just kind of like split it up and try and spread it out.
I mean, that has been suggested because at the end of the day, AI is too big to fail. Like, I can't scrape all back the billions of pieces of data, and figure out where they all came from and individually license them. And, it's impossible. And so, what can be done to fairly compensate the content that they got for free? And so, yes, that's something that's been suggested. I don't think we're anywhere close to figuring it out, that only the big data owners are going to profit from this.
Right. And you look at a platform like Reddit, where the owners of Reddit didn't create the user-generated content. Like
Meta, I mean, that's the big thing right now, right? That they are now taking your photos. If you don't do all the right stuff, it's going into data sets. So,
yeah. So, well, I mean, if you look at Reddit, which isn't one of the companies building an AI, right? Well, who knows? Well, they probably aren't, because if they were, they probably wouldn't have sold their data. So,
right.
But they're not selling their data. They're selling user data.
That's right.
Or user created data that, in theory, like, the Reddit users should be the ones getting compensated, not, but I'm sure in their terms of use or whatever, it's like everything you type in here is hours.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you need to, if these are your concerns, you need to read your terms of use. I mean, no one ever, and myself included, reads the terms of use generally of the platforms the social platforms that I use. I've never read the terms of use of Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, for that matter. And you need to read those things if you want to figure out how you can prevent your content from going into being sold or licensed for AI use.
Yeah, and hilariously, I don't know who said it, but if it's free, the product is you.
That's
So,
right.
you know, I'm sure if you looked, every single one of these platforms is like, oh, gold rush, and uh, the selling data to people is nothing new. That's been happening certainly probably before the internet, where people would collect, mailing lists of people's just physical addresses. So that's, I'm sure every terms of use you go to on any
Mhm.
one of these platforms is going to be pretty hostile to the users.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we know that they've been taking our contact information and selling it to advertisers, why we get followed around the internet with something that we looked at for a second one time on our phone, and but now, yeah, they're actually going in and grabbing our family photos and things now. So
I had not heard that one yet, so I'm
yeah,
sure that's
yeah.
that seems like that would cause a really big outcry from the user base, because that seems even honestly, it's a drag when someone rips off a comic strip or something like
Hmm.
that. But like baby pictures, that's oof.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing about AI, though. I mean, they are collecting these billions of data points, right? And they're using it to generate something new. That is their mission. It's not to retrieve your baby photo. It's to use it as a data point so that if somebody asks me to create a photo of a tow-haired boy, then they'll go and say, okay, here we go, And and so it should not be that your baby photo is popping out. But that, and that's same with people who are really, really worried about them scraping something off of your website. Like, yes, they can, but remember, it's going into a data set among billions of other pieces of information. And so if somebody really wanted to rip off your website, well, why don't they just go to your
There's
website?
easier ways to do it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, there's much easier ways to do it.
Right. Yeah. The baby pictures being private. And I mean, basically, what we're talking about is like the biggest law machine of all time is taking all this stuff and chopping it up into bits that are so small that
Mhm.
nothing super recognizable
Right,
should
right.
be able to pop out the other end.
And there are some, especially with respect to images, AI that generates images. They're starting to put in protections to make sure that nothing literal comes out. I don't know how the technology works, but that is very important because it's important to everyone who's creating images, using AI. So I think that at least from that perspective, you're not going to get someone's baby photo popping out. So,
Right. Yeah, there's some stuff in there. I typed, actually, my daughter typed in something like, we were, she typed in, give me a Gen Z version of the Declaration of Independence.
oh,
And it was like, yo fam. It was hilarious. We ran it a few different times with like different generations, and it was super funny.
that is funny.
It was very funny. And then she wanted a picture of Obama dressed like a millennial or something like that. There's
Mm,
something, we went like, it was like we were having a political conversation already, and it was like, nope, we wouldn't generate
that's right.
any kind of picture of Obama.
Yes,
And I'm sure there's some layer there that's very very slapped on, that is filtering for celebrity names and
there is.
celebrity brands. Like I'll bet you if you tried to get something that is under the Disney domain, you wouldn't get it.
Absolutely.
Like Mickey Mouse or something, they'd be like, yeah, no, you're not getting that.
Yeah, I saw an example recently. It was Mario Brothers.
Hmm.
Someone like, and they had this kind of very elongated, like long, narrow, lanky type of uh, image that came out. Um,
Hmm.
and but still, same colors and mustache, but
Yeah.
but yeah.
I remember using Midjourney not too long ago, and I asked for like a graphic in the style of some artist. I can't, let's just, I don't know. I can't even think of an artist like in the style of Van Gogh or
Mm-hmm.
something. Like, oh, give me a picture of a guy going up an escalator in the style of Vincent Van Gogh. And it's like, oh, we're sorry. We can't copy styles like that. And then, so you just say, well, like describe the style that Vincent Van Gogh painted in. And it gives you this long paragraph. And then
Mm-hmm.
you say, okay, create a picture of a guy going up a stairs with the following attributes. And
Uh,
it totally does it.
and it does it. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's not very, it doesn't seem very sophisticated yet, but hopefully, I mean, hopefully we'll get to a place where like the fear mongering, which I'm not saying it's baseless, but
Mm-hmm.
but the level of just sort of FUD that is in the media and the headlines, it's like so easy to point to this monster.
Right.
And I just have a lot of people, family type people, just have this vague fear
Mm-hmm.
about AI. They don't use it. They've never used it. They don't understand what it is. Uh, and even when they do, if like I was like, well, here's ChatGPT on my phone or whatever, and they'll do it. They like don't know what to ask it, and they kind
Right.
of Google with it. It doesn't like what's the big deal? And there's just it's so classic of this kind of radical new
Mm-hmm.
technology, and again, there's definitely lots of problems, but I just think it's going to get worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I mean, obviously, it's affects I mean, whether we're aware of it or not. I mean, they have used it. They think they haven't used it. They have used it because it's everywhere, right? And it has been for some time. We just didn't realize it.
Yeah, if you've taken a picture on a new phone,
Exactly.
yeah, so it's been corrected. You don't look that good. Filters are on everything now. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it all feels very personal to you, but it really isn't. I mean, it's not any more personal than, ants in an anthill. I mean, it's just, we are just a little speck. Our information is just a little speck in there. So,
I'll probably end up regarding all of these words, but I've always been kind of optimistic about new tech, perhaps overly optimistic. Everyone was freaking out about mobile. Everybody
mm,
freaked out about, you name it, comic books. Socrates was against literacy. I mean,
huh,
it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, well, it's going to ruin people's memories if we just write stuff down. And maybe he was right, but, I only know he said that because someone wrote it down.
right.
Like,
Well, think about all the good things. I mean, all, things like, access to lawyers, that only a certain segment of the population can afford, and to have, AI assistance, or even, healthcare, to have AI, helping with imaging and interpreting, and diagnosing things. I mean, there are some major advancements that I think will be very good for mankind. But yeah, it is the Terminator scenario that we worry about, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think the near term one, the one that I think is most founded is the job disruption. Like that's definitely going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, how the plane is going to land one way or the other,
Right.
but you just don't want it to go nose first. You want it to have a nice smooth landing. So I my prediction, if people are wondering, my prediction is that the job thing is going to be it's not going to be a crash. It's going to be a slow transition that fingers crossed takes long enough that people who are growing, like in high school now
Mm-hmm.
with AI tools will just go into a different direction than they would have otherwise. And it's not like people will be getting fired because, um, well, now we have ChatGPT. We don't need
Right.
you.
We don't need court stenographers anymore or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my son just graduated from high school last week, and the principal,
Congratulations.
was talking about some of the areas of study that some the students were going into, and he was all listing those that weren't around 10 years ago, and so it is everything's evolving, right? So
Hmm.
the beast needs to be fed.
Yes, progress is going to happen, and that's going to upset some people for sure. And hey, like I said, I could easily live to regret these words, but we shall see.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm getting a huge amount of utility out of it, and in none of the ways that would violate any of the things we talked about today. There's just so many ways that you can steer way clear of things like submitting phony court briefs, or just
Right.
really taking any output and just using it. That would scare me a little bit. I don't do that. I more like, it's so great at taking giant documents
Mm-hmm.
that you wrote, so you know that it's original,
Right.
and like boiling it down, transforming it into other formats. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's super useful. It's a great sort of brainstorming partner.
Yeah. As brainstorming, as a first draft. I mean, in the legal industry, best practices is to take anything that you get out of it as if it came from a first year lawyer, and assume
Right.
it's screwed up, and you have to put your eye on it. You need to check everything, and but we still use junior resources, because there's value to using junior resources. That's how we get leverage, right? And so we shouldn't ignore this as another form of leverage in our business. We just need to use it responsibly.
Well, that was a mic drop. That was probably a good place to leave it right there. Cool. And I do see that we're coming up to the top of the hour. So, Erin, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
It has been great. Thank you.
Where can people go to find out more about what you're doing online?
Yeah, well, I mostly hang out at LinkedIn, and I am the OG Erin Austin. I've been there so long. So just, Erin Austin. And then my website is thinkbeyondip.com.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly.